What's going on, guys? CJ here, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 decks to play in Standard for June 2020. Alright guys, so we're going to be looking at Vicious Syndicate reporting. They post this weekly for Standard and about monthly, month and a half ish for Wild. I do plan on making videos each month for both Standard and Wild. I do play both versions of the game, so I think it's worth making some videos discussing both sides of the game. But I did want to go through and run kind of what the report looks like if you're not familiar with it, and why I think it's very useful, especially for the people who are competitive and do want to climb using the best decks and kind of what to game plan around in terms of what you're going to be seeing on a ladder. And yeah, I mean, the reporting is fantastic. I use it weekly. I like to see kind of what people think we should be playing, what we're playing against, what's the meta scores, etc, etc. So anyways, we're going to dive right in. I'm going to show you kind of each of the buckets where they have, you know, their data pools pulled, and kind of discuss just, you know, the data in a little bit of a high level review. And then I'm going to give my 5 decks that I think are your best bets to climb to legend for June 2020. So the first bucket of information that you'll run across in here is going to be your class archetype and the distribution. So this is just showing you at all ranks, Diamond 1 to Diamond 4, and then to Legend. So I generally, in most of the buckets, will kind of stick towards the Legend and the high Diamond ranks, just because that's going to give you, I think, the best data in terms of the players that are playing the game. So it's a little more consistent in terms of the actual power level, because the players obviously at the higher level are playing the decks at a, you know, a less mistake driven gameplay. So so a lot of times I like to see the data at the highest level, even though it might be a little bit less data applied. It is stronger data. So looking at the class archetype for Diamond 1 to 4, you are going to see, and probably what you've been seeing on ladder, is about 25% Demon Hunter. There's really only one archetype for it. It's just your standard aggro tempo Demon Hunter. That's followed by the more recent uptick of your Spell Druid. That deck has been performing pretty good, and it's something you will see quite a bit on ladder. And then your third deck that or third class you're going to be seeing is going to be your Warrior, and Warrior is broken into 3 pretty split variations of your Enrage Warrior, your Control quote-unquote Bomb Warrior, and then followed by Pirate Warrior. So those 3 classes make up about 50% of ladder. So you definitely, if you're looking to climb, you either want to play those decks because they're your tier 1 top decks, or you want to figure out a deck that counters those decks, so that way you can beat what is, you know, your ladder experience. When you look at the Legend, it's almost identical. A few percentage points are kind of moved around a little bit here, but it's still your core Demon Hunter, Druid, Warrior, Rogue are your kind of your top 3, top 4. So nothing really changes there. What you see is what you're going to see on ladder, and it is pretty consistent with what I've been seeing on ladder. Okay, so then we go down to the frequency. You can look at it by week, and you can also actually look at it by day. This is pretty good if you want to see how things have changed when different expansions have released and different patches have come out. So it does break it down by week. Obviously, each of the colors are the classes, and you can see the frequency, so how often those decks are being played. So clearly to the far right, you can see that your Demon Hunter and your Spell Druid and your Warriors are at the top, and at the tail bottom is going to be your Shaman and your Paladin, because they're pretty much unplayed, followed by your Warlocks and your Mages. So this just kind of is a high level information bucket that is showing any surges or changes in the meta. So the more recent changes outside of the patches that came out a couple weeks back is just the climb in Spell Druid. It was kind of one of the lower end decks played, kind of in the same realm as your Warlock and Paladin range, and in the last 2 to 3 weeks you can see that it's now your second most played deck with Hunter falling. So it is kind of a nice little graph and kind of see where the trends are happening, so definitely worth taking a quick peek at. Again, it's definitely a great resource to use after launches of new expansions or new cards, and also patch notes with changes to specific cards, just to kind of see how that really made an impact in the meta. So next is going to be your matchup and the win rate. So obviously your greens are good, your reds are bad. Demon Hunter clearly is your best deck in the game right now, with only Warrior being its really only counter. It generally can beat almost anything else with at least a neutral, if not better, matchup. Spell Druid is followed. So the list here doesn't necessarily go in order of best to worst deck. It's actually by class in alphabetical order, so it isn't in any specific list, but just kind of looking at again some of the top decks here that we kind of discussed earlier. Again, we said Demon Hunter really only has the one bad matchup. Your Spell Druid does struggle to a couple of different matchups, including Demon Hunter. And then you do have your Warrior at the bottom with a lot of green and really just struggles to your Priest matchups. But one deck that I did want to call out here that I think does have a pretty good sleeper spot in the meta is going to be your Highlander Mage. It isn't picked too much right now. I haven't been seeing a lot of it on ladder. It is a little bit of a high roll deck, but it does beat, or not always of course, but it does have a good shot against some of the best decks that you will be seeing a lot of on ladder. So it has a strong matchup against your Druids. It can beat your Warriors. It does struggle a little bit to the Bomb Warrior / Control Warrior, but it can beat pretty much any of the decks. The only real struggle it had was Hunter, and Hunter has been kind of falling in the ladder. So you do have a good chance to play Mage and see good success. So that would be probably my sleeper deck at this point that I think you have a good chance of climbing if you didn't want to specifically play your aggro Demon Hunter, your Warrior options, and the Spell Druid. So yeah, so that's your matchups. And then the next information that's on the report is going to be your power rankings. And again, these are going to be broken into Legend, your Diamond 1 to 4, and your Diamond 5 to 10. So Legend being kind of the core bucket to be looking at here. And you can see that the decks we discussed pretty much throughout this entire reporting stays consistent, that your Warrior and Demon Hunter decks are your top tier 1 decks, with Control Warrior only being a 0.1 power score difference than your Demon Hunter. But you can clearly see that the Control Warrior variant is only a 27.2 score for frequency compared to your Demon Hunter that is 100%. So again, it is seen a significantly more on ladder than your Control Warriors. However, Control Warrior is as strong, if not stronger than that. So something to keep in mind when you're deciding on what you want to play. So this is looking at it at the Legend rank. If you're looking to get to Legend and you're just a few games away, your Diamond 1 to 4 is again consistent with the top 3 decks. It does flip-flop your Demon Hunter and your Control Warrior by just a small smidgen. The power score does drop a bit on the Control Warrior from a 99.9 to 94.5. So again, that's just because generally the better players are Legend or High Legend, and that deck is a little bit harder to pilot than your aggro Demon Hunter. So I don't think that necessarily it's a worse deck than Demon Hunter, but it's just a little bit harder to pilot. So sometimes games are just decided because of mistakes. But again, looking at this list, you can see that Highlander Mage is in your top 5 best decks, and Spell Druid, which is your second most played deck on ladder right now is actually not necessarily your second best deck to play. I do think it's again one of those decks that sees success by good players and struggles a little bit more with mistakes because it is a little bit more thought process driven, I guess, than just kind of slamming face. So it's stronger than probably what it says here, but again, something to keep in mind when you're deciding on what deck you want to play to try and get to legend. And the last piece in here before we get to the specific top 5 decks is going to be your meta score. So this is just showing a graph with your power level of the deck to the far right and your frequency to the top of the axis. And so again, Demon Hunter is your theoretical best deck in Hearthstone right now, where it literally is a 100 on both power and frequency, so how often you're seeing it on ladder. So anything that's not really bottom left is pretty good. And so you can see Spell Druid is kind of lingering up there in a pretty highly played deck, but not necessarily that strong. So keep that in mind when you're looking at all of your options for grinding to legend. But if you are looking for some of those, not necessarily sleeper decks, because they are fairly popular, but if you're looking for decks that aren't played as often as Demon Hunter, but are still as strong as Demon Hunter, is going to be your Control Bomb Warrior and your Enrage Warrior, followed by your Mage, and then a couple of Hunter decks that are still pretty strong. So that kind of goes over all of your Vicious Syndicate data points, if you want to call it that. And then it does go into different class decks for each class. But I want to just focus in on, I think, are the top 5, and it is fairly consistent with what we've already discussed, because those are clearly your top 5 decks. But just to go into a little bit more detail and kind of have the deck codes that they recommend. And so number 5 on this list is going to be Highlander Mage. I think this deck is a bit of a sleeper with a lot of hunters falling off on ladder, creating a stronger position for Mage. This deck is all about cheating mana out with your dragon casters into your big spells like Deep Freeze, Puzzle Box, and Power Creation. Then your power plays are the one-ofs, so obviously your Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, your Reno, and your Zephyrus. So this deck is pretty expensive with 9 legendaries and 6 epics, but if you're looking for a control deck that is a sleeper pick, in my opinion, I think Highlander Mage is definitely going to be up there. Coming in at number 4 on the list is going to be Spell Druid. We did see that that deck isn't necessarily one of the strongest decks, but I think if piloted correctly, it is a strong deck. So this deck is realistically all about kind of your dragon synergy within it, but you're really looking for your Breath of Dreams on 2, followed by Overgrowth on 3, just to give you that insane ramp up. And then you get that, like I said, that dragon package that's really strong against warriors with the Emerald Explorers and your Ysera, which just gives you 3 big dragons on board that's just hard to deal with. And then you can cheat that out, of course, again, because of your Overgrowth and your Breath of Dreams. And then if it's kind of a last resort, or you just have a lot of nothing going on in your hand, your Glowfly followed by Soul of the Forest is an extremely strong play for board presence to clear stuff that's difficult for the opponent to clear, potentially twice, with obviously the Soul of the Forest added onto the Glowflies. And if they aren't able to clear it, you can rip the Savage War or the Power of the Wild to just go face and probably kill them in one turn. So there's a lot of different things you can do with Spell Druid. It's definitely a fun deck, but I think it's a little bit high rolly, because if you aren't drawing your Breath of Dreams or you're not drawing your Overgrowth, you kind of need that ramp and that Druid play in order to really take advantage of the class. So something to keep in mind. It is a little bit high rolly in that regard. So coming in number 3 on the list is your Enrage Warrior. This deck is a strong counter to your Demon Hunter, which makes up a quarter of the ladder, so 25% or so. but it does struggle a bit more than your bomb control warrior to decks like Priest, Mage, and Druid. So it's a very strong deck, and it beats up the number 1 deck, but it does have a little bit weaker matchups to your other control decks. The Greenskin and the Deathwing added to it does add a little bit of balance for those weaker matchups, but it still does struggle. So something to keep in mind. And then our number 2 deck is going to be that Control Warrior or your Bomb Warrior. This deck is very fun to play. It's great against almost every deck on ladder. It's got a really good, strong early game plan with your Ankar Pirate package, especially if you can pull it with your Corsair Cash. And then kind of to beat some of those control decks a little bit later in the game, you've got your Captain Greenskin with your Grommash. And then you get your Battle Rage turns that you can really just try to get 2, 3, 4, 5 card draws to just keep your hand full and keep it going. So that deck is definitely, in my opinion, probably one of the best decks, if not the best deck, even maybe going above Demon Hunter. Again, it's a little bit harder to pilot than Demon Hunter, because Demon Hunter is a really good strong deck, but it's really just kind of slam face, right? So it's not too hard to play, and it's very strong for what it does. But if you're looking for something a little bit more difficult on your grind, or you just don't want to play Demon Hunter, I think this is probably your next best option, followed by the sleeper pick of mine of the Highlander Mage. But yeah, so go to our number 1 best deck to grind in June, I would say is gonna be your aggro Demon Hunter. This deck is just insane for its cards that were introduced with the class was introduced. So your Battle Fiends, your Kane, your Skull, your Metamorphosis, all these cards are just nuts. And then one of the newer builds that seem to be doing very well is the Bone Chewer Brawler with the Og Merchant. The synergy is just extremely good there. And then you have the Beaming Sidekick to help buff the Bone Chewer Brawler to give it a bit more health to stay up. So I think that deck is just insane. I think that added combo really gives it a little bit more oomph. So something to keep in mind, especially if you have a build already, but just not quite optimized to the latest builds. I think that's something to keep in mind. And then I got a couple other decks I thought I'd just throw in here as honorable mentions, not to really go into too much detail, but just if you're looking for another class to play outside of your Mage, Druid, Warrior, or Demon Hunter, I would say your Galakron Rogue and your Galakron Priest are both very strong decks that you could still see good success with. I think one of the big reasons why those decks still see great success is because they are so good at generating random cards from the lackeys and from the Galakron Priest's hero power and the cards within the Galakron Priest deck that just generate so much randomness that is kind of frustrating to play against as the opponent, but it does offer a lot of games where just something ends up in your hand that maybe just didn't start in your deck and gives you that edge to kind of just, pull away in the game. So those decks generally seem to do well, but not as good as the decks we went over. So anyways, guys, I appreciate you watching this video. I do plan on making a version this week of the same information for Wild. So for any Wild fans out there, there will be another video coming out later this week. I'm hoping either tomorrow or the next day that goes over similar information for you Wild players, because I do like to play both sides. So I did want to go over the information, and I do plan on posting this information maybe bi-weekly or monthly. I think the meta is a little stale right now, so I don't anticipate many changes from this list of top 5 standard decks to play changing in the next couple of weeks. So I might not do this weekly, but if we see a patch come through of any sort, or of course when the new expansion comes out to kind of mix things up, I definitely want to make more videos of this. So if it's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments down below. But again, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. I'm trying to grow the channel, so if you did enjoy this, please hit the subscribe button. It definitely helps me a lot, as well as liking the video. Again, it helps me a ton to try and keep this channel going, so I really appreciate it. Have a good day, and I'll see you on the next one.